get started. So we're going to do a sequence of single leg balancing. That is to say, you'll be on one foot. And I'd like us to have a couple of props nearby. I've got my block. I'm going to grab one of my half domes, my half foam rollers. And if that's not a convenient prop to use, then you could have something like a folded or rolled blanket. So I'll switch between a couple of things. But what I'd like us to start with is actually to stand on two legs, and somewhere in your space, can you bring yourself to a wall and lean your back and your hips on this wall with your feet forward. And if that's not convenient, but there's something that you could sit on, like the edge of a chair or a coffee table or even the end of a bed, you could just have a seat at the front edge of that and just have your legs out in front. But what we're looking for in this is the ability here to soften the quads. So as I'm leaning back on the wall, I'm not really using my leg strength to hold me up, just kind of like my feet are pressing into the floor. And I can have here full ability to raise and lower my kneecaps. And as I raise them, I'm going to hold on to that once or twice. Like I'm really going to squeeze into that. And I can notice like which quad is a little bigger, which one's more developed. And then I'm going to totally release that and notice here that at this moment, my quads are not working whatsoever. And we'll do that a couple of times, kind of going through a skill building exercise here. So really squeezing, really tightening, really hardening basically the lower end of the thigh around the knee, and then total and complete release as much as that can happen, as much as you can pull the plug on that. We'll just do a couple more of those. Really squeezing, total release. And again, this is a skill building exercise, so you can assume we're going to look for this later on, but in scenarios where it's maybe not as easy to find it. All right, so let's come off of that and then just take a simple standing position on your mat. Trying to make sure I don't cut off my head in this recording. And as you stand for just a moment, what is the tone of your quads as you stand on two legs? Well, for some people, they're so trained into squeezing their knees that when they're simply standing, they recruit the lower ends of the quads. It's really not required for standing, but it might be one of your strategies in standing. And so for a moment here, could you squeeze, release, just to see if you can turn that off and on a couple times. All right, again, still skill building. So we're going to put this into scenarios where it's even more difficult. All right, so hopefully you can find that freestanding on 2 feet. So find a block, and you're going to step onto this with your right foot. And as you come to standing, we're going to get into a few different ideas about what this instigates. Just going to do one more camera thing. So you're standing on a block with your right foot. Obviously, the block makes me taller. I got to account for that on the camera. And as you're here on that right foot, without getting into every itty bitty detail, what does it feel like here around the quad and the knee? And is it all accessible to squeeze and release that right knee a few times? So it's not bending and straightening. So it's not like doing these little dips or squats. It's the distinction between hardening the quads and turning them off, on and off, on and off. Call that a trial run, and let's do this on side 2. So left foot's going to come onto your block. As you take the step up onto the block, again, can you first address the feeling tone around that quad? And again, there's really a million things that you could get into for a sense of attention inside of a standing balance, but we're starting with this idea of like, what's the rigidity of those quadriceps? And then could you make them more rigid? Could you really amplify the squeeze of that and then totally release it? And try that a few times. And you might be able to discern, now that we're on side 2, that one is more or less responsive than the other. So getting a sense of that. All right. And then could you leave it released? And if you're not sure, you're not sure. But you can always train through contrast. Like if you're like, I think I released it, well, you're the ultimate arbiter of that. So if you're not sure, could you squeeze maximally for just a moment and be like, for certain, clear as a bell, I am absolutely squeezing this quad. And then any amount that you do lesser than that, we're going to call it a release. All right, so let's step back on with that right foot, toes point forward. And from this point on out, I'm going to sprinkle that quad squeeze and release in as a reminder, but it's not going to be the main event on each one of these. So as you're standing, let's start with that as our kind of focal point. As you have this, could you relax your quad? And that's how I'm going to cue it. So relaxing your quad and then moving the weight of your body back so that if you have the tendency to pitch the hips forward, which is so many people stand like this, especially when we're on a single leg, because it's actually, for some people, very stable, meaning they don't move around. However, it's not a great habit. It just is one where you're not as wobbly. Woo, not for me though. And then as you're considering that, could you move your hips back so your femur is vertical from your hip down towards the floor? And could you relax the quad? So hips back, relax the quad. Maybe we'll leave it at 2 points for this second round, standing on one foot, because we've got more to come. We do. Right, let's from there come off, and then left foot comes on. And first you get there, you just kind of organize your balance sufficiently well so that there you are standing on a block. And then thereafter, could your next point of intrigue become the ability to relax that quad down? And then once you feel like you've caught a glimpse of the quad releasing, relaxing, we'll here move the hips back so that as you're standing, it's very distinct in your mind's eye, in your body mind, that the weight of your body is mostly on your heel bone, mostly on your heel bone. So relaxing the quad and moving the hips back. It's a lot. It's only 2 things, but it's plenty. All right, so let's come back down, back onto that right foot, standing on the block. And oh, maybe I'll go from the side again with this. What I'd like you to find from the get-go, you're relaxing the left knee, you're moving your hips back. And then from this, place your hands around the pelvis, right? So it's not the waistline, you don't have to go to the hip sockets, it's around the pelvic rim. And as you hold this for a moment, again, we're going to think about hips going back, kneecap releasing. We're going to come into a degree of forward bending. Do this with that sense of a long spine. So if your inclination is to hunch and roll over, we'll leave that for other exercises. And instead, I want you to, from here, to tip the tailbone up and lean forward. I'll say halfway, but I don't even think I'm in my half forward bend. And then as you're there, can you assess again if the knee is squeezing? Are you using your quad? And wherever you took your forward bend, divide that in half and come halfway up. Right, so I'm nearly standing. It just looks like I'm falling forward a little bit, but it's a plenty of work on that right hip, and then come the rest of the way up. So let's do a whole bunch of those. So you're going to take a forward bend, long spine. Let's get that. And then come halfway up, hit the pause button, come the remainder of the way up. Okay, let's keep going. So here's your forward bend. Relax your knee, move your hips back, come midway up. It's only a couple of degrees for me here. And then the rest of the way up, boom. And then let's come into that forward bend. And again, in terms of a yoga forward bend, it's not much to look at. Like I'm just basically leaning my nose out across the floor. midway up, the rest of the way up. Okay, a couple more. Forward bending. Relax your knee, move your hips back, come halfway up. That was a generous half for me. And then the rest of the way up. Let's do one more. So here's your forward bending. How deep do you want to go with that? What's reasonable and sustainable? Relax your right knee, come midway up, come the rest of the way up. Well, all right, let's go ahead and do that on the other side. So left foot on, right foot hanging free to the side. As you're in vertical, uplifted standing, you're going to think here about relaxing the left knee. Like, are you going directly to your quad to resolve some of your imbalance as you're here? It's not unwise if that's what your method is, because it might work for you. We're going to think a little bit more about dispersing that though, right? Full hip stuff. Okay, so here it is, hands on the hips. Take something of a forward bend. It might look nothing like your typical yoga uttanasana. Figure out what you're doing with your quad, and then pull yourself midway up, and then pull yourself the rest of the way up. Okay, let's keep going. So forward bending. Halfway to vertical, all the way to vertical. Forward bending, relax your knee. Midway up, the rest of the way up. Right, forward bending. Midway up. And the rest of the way up. Let's do two more. I haven't been counting, so if I'm being unequal side to side, say la vie. We're gonna lean forward. I've been too focused on my left hip to count. Halfway up, fully up. Okay, last one. Your forward bend. Halfway, and then all the way. And then step off and shake it out. And again, if you have a wall space to go to, let's do that. If not, you could sit at the front edge of something where you might have space to reach your legs out straight ahead of you. And as you come to a position where you can take the work very distinctly away from the quads, we'll do that squeeze and release exercise a few times. So as I do this, though, it's kind of like a casual lean to the wall. I am looking down to make sure that I haven't got one foot crossed in, another leg turned out, 1 foot forward of the other. And then as I go through this, visually, if it helps you, I like to look sometimes. We're going to pull those kneecaps up, tighten the thighs as much as, and then totally release. And do a few. Squeezing maximally. Like, what does that mean? Can you like max it out for a moment? It's fatiguing. And then total release. Okay, advanced level. Can you squeeze just your right knee? Left knee doesn't even know that anything's going on. And then release the right knee, and then try that out on the left side. And when you squeeze one side, can the other side be totally blank, not working? And then release. And then just a couple more, two together, two release, and then maybe alternate 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Just see how well you can get those quads to respond. Checking on the health of the knees. All right, and then once you've done that to your satisfaction, let's again come up to stand. And we're gonna swap out our standing support. Or do we even wanna call it a support? Because it actually knocks your balance over, with something less stable. So I have a half foam roller, right? Foam roller that's been sawed in half. And you'll be standing on the flat surface of this so that you've got the round side against the floor. If you don't have that, no worries, there's nothing too magical about it. What you could do is fold or roll a blanket to a thickness that when you stand on it, it's a little squishy and it feels, you know, a little destabilized. I really like the half foam roller, so that's what I'll use. But here I've rolled a blanket into a cylinder, and when I come onto it, it's curved, right? So it's not flat. And it does have the ability to kind of roll a little bit. So that's a really good stand-in if you don't have this particular prop. They're both excellent. Alas, your right foot will come on and left foot will be to the side. Woo. And we're going to get back to a couple of the same ideas, right? So firstly, if you're going to move your hips forward, it's pretty likely that you'll end up recruiting something on your quad. So you're going to move your hips back. And if you're on something squishy, you have the advantage of feeling here that you actually sink into that squishy material, which is helpful for assessing is your butt back. And then as you're on the single leg, can you again go to the quad and notice its level of reactivity? Well, when I was standing on the block, kind of where I've taken my practice these days, my quad wasn't so reactive because it was so stable. It's like I've trained myself to arrive to that stillness, but because this is not as stable, my quad has more tendency to turn itself on. So I'm going to let the wobble, meaning I'm not going to work to suppress and hold my breath. I might even on purpose just like make my ankle wiggle a little bit so that I know that I'm wobbling. And then in the midst of all of that, try to soften the quad. Yeah. Quad goes softer. And hips are back when you do this. And you can do what I'm doing, which is sort of amplify the wobble, which is like, I'm not really trying to stand still, right? So that's kind of makes it like not a yoga pose where it's like, you don't want to fall out of it. I don't want to fall out of this, but I'm also not going to be so erring on the side of caution that I'm not moving on purpose. So I'm going to my ankle and I'm just kind of jiggling it to kind of see, as that happens, can I soften my quad? Yeah. Happening a little bit here and there, now and again. Okay, let's do this on side two. If what you're standing on is particularly squishy, just reverse it, turn it around so that you can sink into it with your left heel. So you don't fall into the like pothole that your right heel already pushed in. And same thing, when you come to this, are you tending to lean your hips forward? You're going to move your hips back. Standing on something smushy will inform you that you did in fact stick your butt back because your heel sank down. That's what we're looking for here. And then after that, after the hips go back, the heel sinks in, you're going to be intrigued by what is that knee doing? Does it keep grabbing and squeezing? Well, if you're not sure, right, sometimes we just have to learn by contrast. So you could on purpose squeeze it, like furrow your eyebrow, grit your teeth and squeeze your knee, but then don't. Take it all the way out, pull the plug on that. And again, if you're wobbling because it's a wobbly pose for you, great. I don't have to train you how to make yourself wobble on purpose. But if you feel like you're hunting for stability and every time you can, you're freeze framed, I'd actually dissuade you from that in this particular exercise. So I'm going to this left ankle and I'm kind of like tipping and rocking on purpose, sort of amplifying the rock that would have already happened. And doing that to kind of say, well, you could do it standing on a totally flat surface of the block that was never going to rock around. But can you do it on something that's a little bit more lifelike? Hips back, knee soft, and wobble, wobble, wobble. Okay, that's a good long moment. Let's come off of that. You can set that aside for a second and just in your freestanding position, 2 feet on the floor, can you in this soften your quads? And again, if it's not clear that they have released, squeeze the heck out of them. Know that you have maximally lifted your kneecaps up, hardened your lower thighs. I try not to push back on my knees, but I think that's an outcome for some people. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. It just is where some people's brains try to put their knees. And then as much as you have made your legs locked out and rigid, can you relax them? Right? So it might be good on occasion to have those quads while you're standing totally rigid, like if someone was barreling past you and you didn't want to fall over, you might stiffen your body. If you were on a ship or a little rowboat maybe, but you're standing level, flat, non-mobile surface. So go ahead and relax your quads. All right, back to your wobbly object. And if you've got a couple you can play with, go for it. I'm gonna stick with this dome. Once more, I'm gonna reverse it, turn it the other way. So that little pothole I made with my left heel, I can freshen the material up by pressing into it with my right heel. And then again, we come on, and again, we go to a thing where the hips go back and the knee comes softer. And then on this one, rather than trying to shake it, just to shake it, what can you stabilize? And that doesn't mean I'll be still. It means the whole time there'll be some tipping, some rocking, but I'm not amplifying it with my attention. And hands to hips. And then this left leg is going to do some hip circles. So I'm going to keep the knee gently bent because I think that is just super accessible as compared to a super straight leg. And as I go through this, I'm just kind of stirring this left knee in a circle. It's sort of in the front plane, but it also clips a little bit to the side, but it's not very big. And as I go through this, don't you know, what that left leg is doing is just meant to be a distraction. It's just meant to trip you up a little bit. The real pose is softening that right thigh. Oh, the real pose is moving your hips back and back and back. All right, and then we'll get back to center and we'll step off, spin your squishy object around, put a new pothole for your left heel, step on as soon as hips go back, left thigh relaxes the quads, hands to hips, and then you can begin here to draw, ooh, harder side, a right knee circle. And again, this thing doesn't have to be like majestic, but if it's down here and barely happening, do see if you can lift it up. And again, on this one, I'm not trying to ham it up with extra wobble. It just happens. Oh, whoa. But oh, quad relax, hips go back. We'll give it a few inhales and exhales. Soften the knee. All right, we'll come back and we'll step off. And again, stable two-legged standing, quads turn on, scrunch and squeeze like your knees are making fists, and then total relaxation. Squeeze, release, and it's not bend, straighten, but just like super rigid, more relaxed, rigid, more relaxed. All right, one more time to your block. Last thing, last go round. Last time at the rodeo on this one, your bucking bronco. So right foot on. And then find that action we call a pelvic list. So you're going to tip lower on the right side, which is like this sort of pulley action. Right, so this right hip goes down. You want to find that you actually get taller through your whole pose when that happens. And then let's take this left foot into Vrikshasana, tree pose. And move your right thigh towards the left, meaning don't step into the leg and have your hips kick out, but you're going to still perform that action called a pelvic list and still get taller. All right, and then you know what I'm going to say next. Like a little bit of a broken record here in these short format classes because we're really thinking about very particular targeted things. So as you're standing, one-legged, can you relax your right quad? Oh, it was such a relax that it almost threw me off the block. And as you have that relaxation in the right quad, can you move your hips back? Hands could come into any classic gesture. that you feel completes the pose. All right, friends, and then we'll take the arms down, leg down. Last time, last side. So left foot comes on, free-legged on that right side, meaning it's not doing anything. So don't use the block, don't squeeze it in, just hanging heavy. And in that, you can precede tree pose with that action called the pelvic list. So we drop down on this left side, and then we pull up that right foot. And you might lock the pose together by squeezing your left knee. But I'd like you to do this with relaxed quads so that you might have a glimpse of the strength required to get that outside of the left hip involved. So you're still in that pelvic list. So if you put into the posture this big zigzag, you want to hold on to the outside of that hip, slide it over towards the right and let it slant down on the left. And your whole pose goes up a couple inches. And it's not because suddenly like I'm raising my chest. It's actually from the middle here, I'm arranging my bones to be more vertical rather than on that diagonal. And give it a few breaths. Hands can come to prayer, some other gesture. Take a few inhales and exhales. Now we did do a few exercises where we were standing on our 2 feet. We did one where we were leaning on a wall, and maybe you used a bit of furniture to support that. But otherwise, for the majority of this class, let's say it was about 15, 16 minutes or so, of the rest of the time, you've been standing on 1 foot. So that's kind of like my simplest, most targeted way to get the hip some strength is just pluck 1 foot off the floor. Whoa. All right, let's go ahead and come on down. Not a moment too soon. And that's it. I hope that gives you some hip stuff to think about. A lot of single-legged standing.